Roman Empire, Episode 8. Part 1. Opening, when Rome looked beyond Italy. By the middle of the 3rd century BCE, Rome had changed. It was no longer a small city fighting for survival beside the Tiber. It was no longer only one Latin community among many. After generations of war, alliance, negotiation, defeat, recovery and discipline, Rome had become the dominant power in Italy. From the hills of central Italy to the Greek cities of the south, Roman influence now stretched across the peninsula. But Rome was still in many ways a land power. Its strength came from roads, infantry, colonies, alliances, and the slow, patient construction of military discipline. The Roman legion had learned to fight in mountains, valleys, plains, and walled towns. Rome understood Italy because Rome had been shaped by Italy. Now, for the first time, its ambitions and fears moved across the water. To the southwest lay Sicily, the great island at the center of the Mediterranean. Sicily was not just land, it was grain, ports, wealth, and strategy. Whoever controlled Sicily could influence the sea routes between Italy, North Africa, Greece, and the western Mediterranean. It was a place where cultures met and collided. Greek cities, native Sicilian communities, mercenary bands, tyrants, traders, and the power of Carthage. Carthage was Rome's great rival before Rome fully understood what rivalry on this scale meant. Founded by Phoenician settlers from the eastern Mediterranean, Carthage had grown into a wealthy maritime empire based in North Africa, near modern Tunis. Its ships crossed the sea, its merchants moved through ports. Its influence reached Sardinia, Corsica, parts of Spain, North Africa, and western Sicily. Where Rome was disciplined, agricultural, and land-based, Carthage was commercial, naval, and international. It was a city of harbors, merchants, sailors, silver, contracts, and fleets. It did not look like Rome. It did not fight exactly like Rome. It did not build power in the same way. And yet, both cities were expanding toward the same center of the Mediterranean. The First Punic War, fought from 264 to 241 BCE, was the first great conflict between Rome and Carthage. It lasted more than 20 years. It began in Sicily, but it transformed Rome's place in history. It forced Rome to build fleets, fight at sea, send armies beyond Italy, suffer disaster after disaster, and still continue. This was the war in which Rome learned that conquest outside Italy would be different. It would be longer, more expensive, more complicated, and more dangerous. The First Punic War did not yet make Rome master of the Mediterranean, but it opened the door. And once Rome stepped through that door, it would never again be only an Italian power. Part 2. Sicily Before the War. To understand why Rome and Carthage went to war, we must first understand Sicily. Sicily was one of the most important islands in the ancient Mediterranean. It stood between Italy and North Africa, between East and West, between Greek cities and Punic settlements. Its soil was fertile, especially for grain. Its coastline offered harbors for ships. Its position made it valuable not only economically, but strategically. For centuries, Sicily had been divided among different powers. Greek settlers had founded cities such as Syracuse, Messana, Agrigentum, and others. These cities were not quiet provincial towns. They were active centers of politics, war, philosophy, wealth, and culture. Syracuse, in particular, was one of the great Greek cities of the western Mediterranean. But Carthage had long been present in Sicily as well. Carthaginian power was strongest in the western part of the island, especially around cities such as Panormus and Lilybaeum. Carthage did not need to rule all of Sicily to benefit from it. It needed ports, influence, trade, and security. Western Sicily gave Carthage a strong position near the sea lanes connecting North Africa, Sardinia, Spain, and Italy. Sicily was therefore a frontier, not a quiet border marked by stones, but a living frontier of soldiers, merchants, alliances, and fear. The immediate cause of the First Punic War came from the city of Messana, located on the northeastern tip of Sicily, just across the narrow strait from Italy. Messana controlled access between Sicily and the Italian mainland. Whoever held Messana could watch the water between the two lands. It was a small location with enormous importance. In Messana, a group of mercenaries known as the Mamertines had seized power. These men had once served as soldiers, but after losing their original employment, they took the city for themselves. They became a disruptive and violent force in the region, raiding nearby lands and creating instability. The powerful city of Syracuse, under King Hiero II, moved against them. The Mamertines, afraid of defeat, looked for help. First, some among them appealed to Carthage. Carthage responded by placing a garrison in Messana. But another faction among the Mamertines appealed to Rome. For Rome, this created a difficult decision. The Mamertines were not noble allies. They were not innocent victims. They were mercenaries who had taken a city by force. Rome had recently fought against similar armed groups in southern Italy. Supporting them could seem morally inconsistent and politically dangerous. But if Rome refused, Carthage might control Messana. And if Carthage controlled Messana, a Carthaginian force would sit directly across from Italy. Rome's leaders were faced with a question that would repeat throughout Roman history. Should Rome intervene beyond its borders to prevent a rival from becoming too strong? The answer after debate was yes. Roman forces crossed into Sicily in 264 BCE. At first, this may have seemed like a limited intervention. But in history, limited interventions often open wide doors. Rome had entered Sicily. And by entering Sicily, Rome had entered the world of Carthage. Part 3. Rome and Carthage, two different kinds of power. The First Punic War was not simply a war between two cities. It was a collision between two systems. Rome's power was rooted in land. Its citizens served in the army. Its allies provided manpower. Its military culture emphasized discipline, endurance, and adaptation. The Roman Republic had survived because it could absorb defeat, raise new armies, and return to the field. Rome's political structure also helped its expansion. The Senate provided continuity. Magistrates changed each year, but aristocratic families, traditions, and military ambitions gave Rome a steady supply of leaders. Roman society valued public honor, and war offered the aristocracy a path to glory. A successful commander could win prestige, office, and memory. Carthage was different. It was also a republic in some sense, with councils, magistrates, elite families, and assemblies. But its power rested more heavily on commerce, wealth, ports, diplomacy, and naval strength. Carthage hired many of its soldiers from outside its citizen body: Libyans, Iberians, Numidians, Gauls, Greeks, and others. This did not mean its armies were weak. Many were highly effective. But Carthage's military system depended heavily on money, contracts, and command over diverse forces. At sea, Carthage was far more experienced than Rome. Carthaginian sailors knew the Mediterranean. Their ships were not improvised tools. They were the instruments of a maritime civilization. Carthage understood naval logistics, coastal warfare, and long-distance sea movement. Rome, by contrast, had almost no serious naval tradition before the war. Romans could fight fiercely on land, but the sea was another world. The sea did not reward courage alone. It required shipbuilding, crews, rowing discipline, navigation, weather knowledge, and experience. A fleet was not merely an army placed on water. It was a different military machine. This difference shaped the early war. Rome could send armies into Sicily, defeat local forces, and pressure Carthaginian positions. But Carthage could reinforce, supply, and move by sea. So long as Carthage controlled the waters, Rome's victory in Sicily would remain incomplete. The Romans eventually recognized the problem with brutal clarity. If they wanted to defeat Carthage, they needed a navy. This was one of the most remarkable features of the First Punic War. Rome did not begin as a naval power, but it decided to become one. Ancient sources describe the Romans learning from a captured or wrecked Carthaginian ship, using it as a model to build their own fleet. Whether the story is exact in every detail or simplified by tradition, it expresses a deeper truth. Rome learned through necessity. Rome's genius was not that it always began with superiority. Often it did not. Rome's genius was that when it met a new problem, it could copy, adapt, organize, and continue. The sea at first belonged to Carthage, but Rome was preparing to challenge even that. Part 4. The Romans build a navy. For Rome, building a navy was an act of ambition and desperation. A war in Sicily could not be won by infantry alone. Carthage could use its fleet to protect ports, move supplies, and threaten Roman communications. If Rome remained only a land power, it would fight with one hand tied behind its back. So Rome began to construct ships on a large scale. The main warship of the period was the quinquereme. It was not a simple boat. It was a large, powerful galley driven by rows of oarsmen and designed for speed, maneuver, and impact. Naval battles often involved ramming, where ships attempted to strike enemy vessels with bronze rams at the waterline. Success depended on timing, training, and coordinated rowing. This was a problem for Rome. Roman soldiers could be trained relatively quickly compared to experienced sailors, but naval crews required practice. A ship that could not maneuver well was vulnerable. A fleet without experience could become a floating disaster. Rome answered the problem in a very Roman way. It tried to turn naval combat into land combat. The famous Roman invention associated with this period was the corvus, a boarding bridge fitted to ships. The corvus could be dropped onto an enemy vessel, allowing Roman soldiers to cross over and fight hand to hand. In other words, Rome reduced the advantage of Carthaginian seamanship by bringing legionary combat onto the deck. The corvus was not a perfect device. It may have made ships heavier and less stable, especially in rough weather. But in battle, it gave Rome a temporary solution to a major weakness. If Roman crews could get close enough, Roman soldiers could board and fight as infantry. The result was dramatic. In 260 BCE, at the Battle of Mylae, the Roman commander Gaius Duilius won Rome's first major naval victory over Carthage. This was more than a tactical success, it was psychological. Rome had entered a field where Carthage was supposed to dominate, and Rome had won. The victory was celebrated in Rome. A monument known as the Columna Rostrata, decorated with the prows of captured ships, honored Duilius. For a society that measured glory in public memory, this mattered deeply. Rome was telling itself a new story. We can fight at sea. But one victory did not end the war. Carthage was not defeated. Sicily remained contested. Naval warfare remained dangerous. Storms could destroy fleets as surely as enemies, and Rome would soon learn that the sea was not only a battlefield, but an unforgiving force of nature. Still, Mylae marked a turning point. Rome had crossed a mental boundary. It was no longer simply building ships. It was beginning to imagine itself as a Mediterranean power. Part 5. Sicily becomes a long war. The First Punic War did not unfold as one clean campaign. It became a long struggle of sieges, shifting alliances, naval battles, and exhaustion. After Rome entered Sicily, Syracuse eventually became Rome's ally. King Hero II of Syracuse recognized that cooperation with Rome was more useful than resistance. This alliance was important because Syracuse provided supplies, local knowledge, and stability in eastern Sicily. For Rome, which had entered an island full of unfamiliar politics, such support was valuable. The war then moved westward, toward Carthaginian strongholds. One of the major early Roman successes was the capture of Agrigentum in 262 BCE. Agrigentum was an important city in southern Sicily and a major Carthaginian base. Roman forces besieged it, and after hard fighting, the city fell. This showed that Rome could conduct serious operations in Sicily, not merely defend Messana. But Carthage remained strong in western Sicily. Cities such as Lilybaeum and Drepana were difficult to capture. Carthaginian commanders understood how to use fortified ports and naval supply lines. Rome could win victories and still struggle to force a final decision. This is one reason the war became so long. Neither side could easily destroy the other. Rome was powerful on land, but Carthage could hold coastal positions and use the sea. Carthage was powerful at sea, but Rome could keep raising armies and pressing inland. Each side had strengths that prevented collapse. The geography of Sicily made everything slower. Armies had to move through difficult terrain, manage supplies, and besiege fortified cities. A siege in the ancient world was rarely quick. It required patience, engineering, manpower, and money. Disease, hunger, weather, and morale could be as dangerous as enemy weapons. Rome's strength in this war was endurance. The Republic could lose men, ships, and money, then return. This quality had appeared before in Italian wars, but now it was tested on a larger stage. The war was expensive. Fleets cost enormous resources. Armies had to be maintained far from home. Political leaders had to convince citizens and allies that the struggle was worth continuing. Carthage's strength was wealth and naval experience. But Carthage also had limits. Its armies often depended on hired troops, and its political leadership sometimes struggled to match Rome's relentless public commitment to war. The First Punic War, therefore, became a contest of systems. Rome asked, how much can a land republic endure when forced onto the sea? Carthage asked, how long can a maritime empire defend distant positions against an enemy that refuses to stop? The answer would take more than 2 decades to discover, and the price would be paid in ships, silver, soldiers, and storms. Part 6. The African Expedition and Regulus. At one point in the war, Rome attempted something bold. It carried the war to Africa. The logic was clear. If Carthage could not be easily defeated in Sicily, perhaps the pressure should be brought directly to Carthaginian territory. Rome would invade North Africa, threaten Carthage itself, and force a favorable peace. To do this, Rome needed control of the sea. In 256 BCE, a massive naval battle took place near Cape Ecnomus, off the southern coast of Sicily. It was one of the largest naval battles of the ancient world. Roman and Carthaginian fleets clashed in a struggle that showed how far Rome had come since the beginning of the war. The Romans won, opening the way for an invasion of Africa. The Roman expedition landed in North Africa, under commanders including Marcus Atilius Regulus. At first, the campaign seemed successful. Roman forces defeated local opposition, captured towns, and threatened Carthaginian interests close to home. Carthage, shaken by the invasion, considered negotiations. But success can be dangerous when it produces overconfidence. Regulus, according to later tradition, demanded harsh terms. Carthage chose to continue fighting. It reorganized its forces and received help from a Spartan mercenary commander named Xanthippus. Xanthippus recognized that Carthage had not been using its strength properly. On open ground, Carthaginian cavalry and elephants could be extremely dangerous. In 255 BCE, the Carthaginian army defeated the Romans at the Battle of Tunis. Regulus was captured, and the Roman invasion collapsed. This was a severe blow. Rome had tried to end the war by striking at Carthage itself, but instead lost an army. Even worse, when Rome sent a fleet to rescue survivors, it later suffered catastrophic losses in storms. Ancient naval warfare was always at the mercy of weather. A fleet could be built with money, manned with effort, and destroyed in a single disaster. The African expedition teaches several important lessons. First, Rome was now thinking beyond Italy and Sicily. It was willing to project power across the sea, even toward Africa. This was a new scale of ambition. Second, Carthage was not weak. When properly led and organized, Carthaginian forces could defeat Roman armies decisively. Third, the war revealed the danger of Rome's persistence. Even after disaster, Rome did not withdraw permanently. It absorbed the loss, mourned the dead, rebuilt, and continued. This pattern would become one of the defining features of Roman history. Rome could be defeated in battle. But defeating Rome in battle was not the same as defeating Rome in war. Part 7. Disaster, Endurance, and Hamilcar Barca. As the war dragged on, both sides suffered heavily. Rome lost fleets not only to Carthaginian action, but to storms. The sea was a battlefield Rome could enter, but not fully control. Thousands of men could vanish beneath waves. Ships could be shattered along coasts. Supplies could disappear. The cost was immense. There were also military defeats. In 249 BCE, at the Battle of Drepana, the Romans suffered a serious naval loss against Carthage. Roman confidence at sea was shaken. The war had already lasted many years, and victory still seemed distant. Carthage, meanwhile, held key positions in western Sicily. One of its most important commanders in the later phase of the war was Hamilcar Barca. His name would become famous not only because of his own career, but because he was the father of Hannibal, the man who would later bring Rome to the edge of destruction in the Second Punic War. Hamilcar Barca operated in Sicily with energy and skill. He used positions such as Mount Ercte and Mount Eryx to harass Roman forces and maintain Carthaginian resistance. He did not command enough resources to completely reverse the war, but he made Roman victory difficult and costly. His campaigns showed that Carthage still possessed talented commanders and fighting spirit. By this stage, the war had become exhausting. Rome had been fighting for more than a generation. The men who began the war were no longer the same men who saw its final years. Families had lost sons. Allies had contributed manpower. Wealth had been spent. Ships had been built, lost, and built again. And yet, Rome continued. One of the most striking moments came near the end of the war, when Rome needed another fleet, but public finances were strained. According to ancient accounts, wealthy Roman citizens helped fund the construction of ships. Whether every detail is exact or idealized, the story reflects something important. Rome's elite connected personal status with public survival. To serve the Republic was also to preserve family honor. The new Roman fleet was built with improved designs and greater experience. Rome had learned from earlier failures. It no longer depended only on the corvus. Its sailors and commanders were better prepared than before. The final phase of the war would be decided not by one heroic speech, but by endurance, finance, training, and the ability to rebuild after loss. The First Punic War was not glamorous by its end. It was tired, expensive, and brutal. But Rome was still standing, and Carthage was beginning to weaken. Part 8. The Aegates Islands and the end of the war. The decisive battle came in 241 BCE near the Aegates Islands, west of Sicily. Rome's new fleet, commanded by Gaius Lutatius Catulus, moved to cut Carthaginian supply lines. Carthage needed to support its forces in Sicily, especially those under Hamilcar Barca, but its fleet was not in ideal condition. Many of its ships were heavily loaded with supplies, and its crews were less prepared than Rome's newly trained forces. The Romans won a major naval victory. This battle finally broke Carthage's ability to enter the war in Sicily. Without secure supply lines, Carthaginian positions on the island became impossible to maintain. Hamilcar Barca, though undefeated in spirit and still dangerous as a commander, could not fight without support. Carthage asked for peace. The treaty ending the First Punic War forced Carthage to evacuate Sicily. It also required Carthage to pay a large indemnity to Rome. After more than 20 years of struggle, Sicily was no longer a battlefield between equal powers. It became Rome's first overseas province. This was a turning point of enormous importance. Before this, Rome had ruled through a network of Italian allies, colonies, treaties, and communities tied to the Republic in different ways. Sicily was different. It was not part of the Italian alliance system. It was overseas territory. It had to be governed, taxed, and administered in a new way. Rome had won an island, but it had also created a new problem. How does a republic built for city and alliance govern territories beyond Italy? The answer would shape the future Roman Empire. Sicily became a crucial source of grain. Roman officials would oversee taxation and administration. Local communities would retain certain forms of life, but ultimate power now belonged to Rome. This was not yet the full provincial system of the later empire, but the foundation had been laid. For Carthage, the defeat was humiliating and costly. It lost Sicily, paid indemnities, and faced internal strain. Soon after the war, Carthage would be shaken by a dangerous conflict with its own unpaid mercenaries, known as the Mercenary War. Rome would later take advantage of Carthaginian weakness to seize Sardinia and Corsica as well. Peace did not bring true friendship. It brought resentment. Carthage had lost the First Punic War, but it had not disappeared. Rome had won, But it had not destroyed Carthage. Between the two powers, memory hardened into suspicion. And in one Carthaginian family, especially in the house of Hamilcar Barca, hatred of Rome would become an inheritance. The First Punic War ended in 241 BCE. But the Punic struggle was not over. It was only sleeping. Part 9. Closing. What the First Punic War changed. The First Punic War changed Rome more than Rome may have understood at the time. At the beginning of the war, Rome was the strongest power in Italy. By the end, it had become a power beyond Italy. It had crossed the sea, built fleets, fought naval battles, invaded Africa, survived disasters, and taken Sicily as its first province. This was not a small adjustment. It changed the scale of Roman politics and Roman ambition. Rome learned that overseas war required money, ships, supply lines, commanders, administrators, and long-term commitment. It learned that victory outside Italy was not just about winning battles. It was about holding territory, organizing tribute, managing allies, and controlling movement across the sea. The war also changed the Roman imagination. Before, Rome's world had been the peninsula. After the First Punic War, the Mediterranean became thinkable. Not yet fully Roman, not yet fully controlled, but thinkable. The sea was no longer only a boundary, it was a path. For Carthage, the war was a wound. The city survived, but it lost prestige, territory, and money. Its defeat did not remove its power, instead, it redirected it. In the years after the war, Carthage would look increasingly towards Spain, where Hamilcar Barca and his family would build a new base of strength. That Spanish expansion would eventually produce one of the most famous military figures in all ancient history, Hannibal Barca. And Hannibal would not simply fight Rome. He would invade Italy. He would cross the Alps. He would defeat Roman armies in battles that became legendary. He would force Rome to confront the terrifying possibility that its rise could still be reversed. But that is the next great chapter. For now, we remain at the end of the First Punic War, with Sicily under Roman power, Carthage wounded but alive, and the Mediterranean beginning to change. Rome had entered the sea as a beginner. It emerged as a victor. Not because it avoided mistakes, not because it never suffered disaster, not because it was naturally superior at every form of war. Rome won because it adapted. It copied what it needed. It endured what it suffered. It rebuilt what it lost. It turned weakness into training, defeat into memory, and survival into expansion. The First Punic War was Rome's first war against a great Mediterranean rival. It was also Rome's first lesson in empire. And as night settles over the harbors of Sicily, over the silent wreckage beneath the water, over the empty decks and distant walls of Carthage, we can see the shape of the future beginning to form. Rome has crossed the sea, and history will never return to the shore.